Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and this is kind of an expansion on the one that I posted about Jim Jordan the other day. And so if you haven't seen that one, you might want to watch that one too. And they kind of go together here, the whole thing. So I told you in the last one that there's been this back and forth between, about the security clearances and the House Oversight has really been trying to get all of this information about Trump because they claim that this whistleblower came forward and said that there's just the wrong things going on with Trump and the, security clearances, and he's given security clearances to people he shouldn't have, and so on and so forth. Well, Elijah Cummings, who is the head of the oversight, sent this letter, and he's been sending letters back and forth to this guy. Well, this guy is Pat, and I think his last name is Cipollone, and he is currently the counsel to the president. He took over after McGahn left. And this is this is just very interesting. This was the letter from Elijah Cummings, and it's talking about, I wrote to you in order to request for a final time that the White House cooperate voluntarily with the committee's investigation of security clearance processes at the White House in response to grave breaches of national security at the highest levels of the Trump administration. I really wish that Elijah would have been this motivated to find out about all the security breaches that were going on during Obama's time and all the people who had their security background checks waived because Obama wanted to get them in and they had no business being in there, but he waived that. And like the Awan brothers, whose background checks were waived, they didn't have to have those because Debbie Wasserman Schultz didn't think they needed them. And then, what, a whole big bunch of Democrats followed after him? Well, that whole Awan thing, if you haven't found out about that, that was interesting. And my former senator, Joe Donnelly, was one of them. Signed off, let's just sign the waiver because, if Debbie Wasserman Schultz says they're okay guys, we can just say they're okay guys. We don't need to check into them at all. Yeah, well, they were Pakistanis and they were selling secrets, kind of. They were into everything. Stuff they weren't supposed to be doing, but I think a deal has been made with them. I think they turned over some major information, but I also think that there's something else in the works with them. It's not over with. Anyway, this was his letter, and it goes through, and he says, well, here's the reason. We've been trying to get you to cooperate, but you've declined. Your actions are now preventing the committee from obtaining the information it needs to fulfill its constitutional responsibilities. And he goes through and pretty much just yells at the guy, and of course he mentions the whistleblower, and that she was somebody who knows what's going on, and she says she's terrified of going back, and there were all these wrong things that went on, and yet she testified to him. And here's where he wanted, this Carl Klein to come in, and here is a letter that came out on March 4th. Now, I know that's before this letter from Cummings, because this was on the 1st of April, but I want to show you this because this is so typical of what's going on. This shows it completely. And by the way, the guy writing this, Cipollone or whatever his name is, here he is. If you go to Wikipedia, he something interesting about him, he graduated from Covington Catholic High School. I mean, well, what are the odds? Isn't that kind of strange? Anyway, I just wanted to point that out to you. I thought that was kind of, interesting, I guess. And so, yeah, he was the guy that came in. He was appointed in October 2018, and he actually stepped up on December 10th. That's when he started. And Laura Ingraham knows him and credits him with helping her convert to Catholicism. So, yeah, interesting. So, it's just kind of a weird connection there that I found. But let's go back to what he says here, because this guy does a great job. He really does. And I know it's 3 pages, but you got to hear this, folks. It really is. So he starts out. Now remember, this is not after Cummings did all the thing about the, whistleblower and all that. That came out April 1st. So this is a month before this. And so he says, "Dear Chairman Cummings, I write in response to the committee's letter of March 1st, 2019, concerning the security clearance process for White House personnel. At the outset, I think it is important to address mischaracterizations in your letter. Contrary to the claims in your letter, my office has offered compromises to address the committee's requests while protecting the legitimate and well-established interests of the executive. The White House's history of ongoing cooperation is well documented. Since receiving the committee's first letter during this Congress on January 23, 2019, we have responded in good faith to every letter received from your committee." Okay, now Cummings is saying, no, you didn't. You haven't responded to us at all. That's what this letter back here, that you've not responded to us. You've not talked to us. You're not helping us. You refuse to produce anything. And, that's what he's saying all throughout that letter. Well, anyway, he goes on here and he says, "Our staffs have been in continuous communication. I promptly responded to your January 23rd letter on January 31st, 2019, and your February 11th letter on February 25th, 2019. I also visited your office and met with you on January 16th, 2019, for the purpose of discussing this issue and to discuss a path forward that accommodates the committee's interest as well as the prerogatives of the President. Several days before you sent the March 1st letter, my staff ordered to make available an official from the Personnel Security Office to provide a briefing and to provide documents describing the security clearance process. Your staff requested a phone call for March 1st to continue this discussion. Shortly after receiving the committee's March 1st letter and during the pre-scheduled phone call that same day, my staff reiterated our offer to make available documents and a briefer who would explain the process for granting clearances for White House personnel. This is precisely how the established and constitutionally mandated accommodation process is supposed to work." Now, if you remember, in the other video, Cummings was complaining because, they're not going to give us this person who will answer all of our questions. Well, they said he could come and he would answer general topics. He would talk about the process and everything, but he wasn't going to talk about specific people. And you saw the list in the last one. It was like Flynn and Gorka and Kushner and Ivanka, So it was a targeted list. And that's who they really want to find out because they're trying to get this information. And it's really interesting. Somebody in the comments, and I can't remember who, I'm sorry, but somebody in the comments for that video was mentioning they wondered if that was because they're trying to find out who Q is. Well, that could be. I mean, I'm sure they would like to stop him from talking. That's for sure. Anyway, so that was the situation that's going on. I mean, this has all been going on ever since this Congress took office. I mean, when it started in January, I mean, they have been on this like crazy because they really want to try to target these people, especially these people in Trump's inner circle. And that's who they were really working on. That's the whole purpose behind this, because that's who they're trying to get. And this is one of the things they're using this committee, the Oversight Committee, as a ruse, essentially, to try to get to them and to stop Trump from being able to do anything. So anyway, then he goes on and he says, "By contrast, the committee has shown no willingness to accommodate legitimate executive branch prerogatives as required under the Constitution." And then notice what he does here. Now, if you were with me with the other letter in the other video, I showed how, Cummings here goes through and he makes a lot of bluster and he says, it's a constitutional right and everything, but he has no cases to back it up. Okay, and this is not, lawyers work off of cases, off of precedents. And if you don't have cases to back up what you're saying, see, there are no cases here. really everything that he wanted to say was all about this Tricia Newbold, who was the whistleblower. And that's pretty much the only thing he had to support what he was talking about. But he goes through and, it's clear that, you're not going to help us out and you're not going to let him testify. But they said, yes, he will testify. He can testify. It's just he's not going to talk about individuals. Oh, yeah, here's the list of individuals. John Bolton, Michael Flynn, Sebastian Gorka, Jared Kushner, John McEntee, K.T. McFarland, Robert Porter, Robin Townley, and Ivanka Trump. Yep, that's who they're targeting. That's who they really want to get. And then they add a few more here. In this one, they get Kelly in there and McGahn and everything. So that's, what they're talking about here. But notice he doesn't use any, there are no references here to anything legal because there's no case precedents mentioned. He doesn't mention any of them. He just says, well, we have this right, and if you don't like it, that's too bad because we have this right. Well, that's not how the Cipollone is doing things. And he's saying, yeah, you don't really have the right you think you have. So he says, because Congress derives its oversight authority from its legislative powers, my office must ensure that any request from the committee serves a legitimate legislative purpose. I love this. I mean, he's like, well, you gotta actually follow the Constitution here, and that means you have to have a legitimate legislative purpose to be asking for this stuff. And if you don't have it, sorry, Cummings, you're not going to get it. Anyway, and so he gives this case here. Nor is the Congress a law enforcement or trial agency. Ooh, surprise, Democrats. These are functions of the executive and judicial departments of government. No inquiry is an end in itself. It must be related to and in furtherance of a legitimate task of the Congress. So see, this is the problem. They have to have a reason for wanting these things, but they don't. They just want them because they want them and they're trying to get dirt. That is the whole point. Anyway, and here's this case. For this reason, from the very beginning in my January 31st response letter, I requested information from the committee about how your regulatory needs depend upon receiving the particular information you seek. So in other words, if you don't have a reason for it, we're not going to give it to you. In response, the committee has failed to point to any authority establishing a legitimate legislative purpose for the committee's unprecedented and extraordinarily intrusive demands. I mean, he doesn't pull any punches. I like this guy. Including the demand to examine the entire investigative files of numerous individuals whom the president has chosen as his senior advisors. Yeah, see, they want to examine the entire investigative files. Yep, that's what they want. They want everything just so they can find some little morsel in there that they can expand, some little molehill that they can make into a huge mountain. Because you got to remember, CNN and MSNBC don't have anything to talk about now that the Russian collusion thing's been all blown up. Of course, they are still talking about it, which boggles my mind. But I think they're talking to air at this point. People are tired of it. Anyway, he goes on and says, as I have explained in multiple previous letters, it is clearly established as a matter of law that the decision to grant or deny a security clearance is a discretionary function that belongs exclusively to the executive branch. And here's this case, Department of Navy versus Egan and Bennett v. Chertoff. And, the committee has not cited any legal authority to the contrary, nor explained what legitimate legislative initiative would require the information the committee seeks. Neither has the committee provided any constitutional or statutory basis for developing reforms in current White House systems and practices. The committee has not explained any potential legislation that Congress would legitimately enact to alter the standards or the process that the executive branch follows for granting clearances to the president's closest advisors in the executive office of the president. So in other words, you are talking about it, you're saying, well, we're doing this so we can enact some of these necessary reforms. But yet they're not showing any examples of reforms they would do. They have no clue. They're not doing it for reforms. They're doing it purely out of spite and because they hate this president. Instead, the committee's letters have focused on irrelevant statutory citations that have no application here. The committee's March 1st letter asserts that the committee provided numerous examples of congressional precedent for obtaining individual security clearance information from the White House. This is what the left likes to do. They claim that they have all this evidence and that they're putting forward information and the precedent and everything, but they don't. It's like with climate change. They keep claiming there's all this evidence, but when it comes down to it and you start looking at the evidence they're claiming, it's not valid. There's a lot of holes in that information. It's not as solid as they're claiming it to be. And this is a big problem. So when they make these claims, they make it sound like everyone is part of this. I mean, if you've heard Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talk about the Green New Deal, you hear her talking about science says, all these scientists say that in 12 years, we're doomed if we don't do something drastic. And yet, she doesn't have anything to back that up. When Pelosi and Schumer were sitting in that presser with Trump that one time, and they were talking about the wall, he kind of tricked them into that because they didn't know the press was going to be there. I thought that was funny. Anyway, when they did that, the same kind of thing. They were saying, well, experts say that, we don't need the wall, that, some other kind of thing will work just as well. And it's like, if I would have been Trump, I would have said, what experts there, Chucky? What experts do you have? You have none. You're telling me you've got somebody sits behind a computer all day long and he's going to know more about what the border needs than the border security guards that are out there every day doing their job and they see it firsthand. Is that what you're telling me? See, we know they don't have any evidence on the border wall because we know they haven't gone down there. They've not gone to see it themselves. They haven't even asked the Border Patrol, what they need or anything. They haven't done that because they know what the people are going to say. They're going to say they need the wall. And the same thing is true here. Cummings is claiming all of these things. It's just not it. And he's quoting from this letter from Elijah Cummings and to himself, Cipollone, and he says that is simply not the case. As I explained on February 25th, none of the statutes cited in the committee's letter regulates either the standards for White House security clearances or the processes by which those clearances are decided. And, he quotes his letter to him, too, from February 25th. I think this at 4 here, and then there's one up here that's at 2. I think those are the footnotes that he's referring to. That's the best I can do on that. Furthermore, the committee cited no prior instances in which it was granted access to security clearance information about particular White House personnel. My letter cited over a dozen federal judicial decisions, including cases decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, and rebutted every statute and congressional hearing cited by the committee to show that, in fact, Congress has consistently recognized the president's exclusive power to make decisions concerning access to national security information. The committee's letter also ignores the straightforward point that merely citing the House of Representatives' own internal rules, specifically House Rule 10, provides no response whatsoever to constitutional objections we raised to the committee's overtly intrusive document request. I like his wording, overtly intrusive. And it is, very much so. Finally, the committee's letters have been particularly silent in articulating any rationale to explain how information from individual background files is necessary for Congress to assess potential legislation. Despite all of this, the committee has refused to alter any of its radically intrusive demands for the individual background files on its list of selected individuals. Now remember who those individuals are right back here. Yep, those individuals were the ones that they were looking at. It has to do with Bolton and Flynn and Gorka and Kushner. Yeah, that's who they're looking for, those people right there. Although we are prepared to continue negotiations in good faith, the committee seeks unilateral concessions without any offer of accommodation on its part, and then complains that the White House has refused to simply turn over everything the committee inappropriately seeks. These actions suggest that the committee is not interested in proper oversight, but rather seeks information that it knows cannot be provided consistent with applicable law. We will not concede the executive's constitutional prerogatives or allow the committee to jeopardize the individual privacy rights of current and former executive branch employees. This White House has a well-documented history of cooperating with the committee in this matter. As you know, we agreed to make the EOP, that's the Executive Office of the President, Chief Security Officer, available to brief the committee. Additionally, we agreed to allow the committee to review White House documents relating to the process for adjudicating clearances. These offers still stand. Yet the committee has failed to take advantage of the information that we have offered and instead has issued an ultimatum, writing a final time, to request that the White House immediately produce all responsive documents and schedule transcribed interviews for all witnesses. Such a measure is without legal support, clearly premature, and suggests a breach of the constitutionally required accommodation process. In any event, I now understand that your staff sent an email late this afternoon, both accepting this accommodation and rejecting its sufficiency. So, they said, yeah, okay, so the guy can only talk about generalities, so we'll let him come, but then they also turn right around and say, but we know it's not enough, and we want him to talk about specifics. They want it both ways. We believe the best course is to move forward with this agreed-upon accommodation and then speak again once your review of the documents and the briefing are complete. I mean, the adult in the room here, this is the adult, and Cummings certainly is not. As I have written to you numerous times, I am always available to discuss your concerns. I hope we can agree that such negotiations, pursued in good faith, are far better than legally unsupportable ultimatums demanding unilateral surrender of the prerogatives of a co-equal branch of the government. Failing to engage in meaningful accommodation may generate headlines, but it is contrary to the obligations imposed on our two branches of the Constitution. It may generate, I like that one. Failing to engage in meaningful accommodation may generate headlines. He's calling him out. He's telling him, I know what you're doing. You're just wanting to get a bunch of headlines for dirt on Trump. And I'm not going to let you do that. You cannot trample the entire executive branch just because you think you have the right to do all these things. You don't. The executive branch is a separate branch, and yes, it is co-equal, so it's not that you have more power than Trump does. Sorry, you don't. We believe that we can accommodate the legitimate interests of your branch while protecting the interests of the branch we represent. We respectfully ask that you do the same. Please let me know if this approach is acceptable. And then he signs it here. Yeah, and he sent a copy to Jim Jordan. But this was a great letter. I enjoyed reading this when I first read it, and it's like, yeah, he smacked him down good, didn't he? Many, many times in here. And of course, Cummings, this was the letter Cummings sent after that one. I mean, he's not even listening. He's not paying any attention to it. He's just claiming that he's got all these reasons, and instead you claim to have accommodated the committee's interests by providing a 90-minute briefing on general policy matters. Well, yeah, that would be accommodating. And you've refused to provide any information about specific individuals. So in other words, you didn't give us the dirt we wanted on those people. And so we are going to continue to make your life miserable. Oh, sometimes I just wish I could kick the butts of all those people that voted for the Democrats in the House. Oh, and I wonder how many of them did not legitimately win, but were put in anyway because of how they fixed the election. So, I don't know. It's crazy that we're going through this. But in some ways, I think maybe this was planned. I don't think they were really pushing that hard on getting the House, like the Trump and the military intelligence guys. And the reason for that is because this is exposing who these people really are. And that's what a lot of this has been the last 2 years. It's been setting traps for the deep state. And they take the bait every single time. The Democrats can't let the bait go. They have to take it. And that's what they're doing right now. They are hanging themselves. They really are, by what they're doing with this. And people are seeing through it. I mean, it's waking up a lot of Americans when they see how these people, the truth is out there and they refuse to accept it. I mean, Mueller, for months, they were saying, oh, how Mueller is just great and we have to respect him and protect his investigation, and it was just so good and he's going to give us the real truth. And then when he comes out and he makes his claim, well, that can't possibly be the truth, so there's got to be something else. And so now they're pointing the finger at Barr, and they say, oh, Barr's covering up. They're desperate. They really are desperate. So anyway, that's what I've got for you. I've got these two here. I do have the transcript. I'll put the link down below for the transcript for Bill Priestap's interview, his testimony. I just haven't been able to get very far in it because I've had some family issues I had to deal with the last few days. My mom's not doing so great. She had a couple falls. And so I've been dealing with that. And I really have not had as much time to read things. And this is kind of a long document. So, 219 pages. I'm on page 8. That's how far I got. But there's, some interesting things that I've heard are in here. And so, I'm working on it. And hopefully tomorrow maybe I'll have more to say about it. But yeah, so there's a lot, there's a lot to read. So many things to read, just not enough time. So, yeah, and I found out something today. I'm working on reading the book by Dan Bongino, the Spygate book. And in there he was mentioning how Chuck Grassley was working a long time ago on trying to get more clarification on the FARA process, which is the foreign agents thing, and how it influenced the elections. And that was even before 2016. So I'm kind of interested to see maybe if I can find some of that information too, but I just haven't had time. So it's a lot of things to look into, that's for sure. So anyway, that's what I've got for you. And I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll put the links to all of these letters down below. You can see them for yourself. I just think that this guy right here did a great job, and I hope that he continues to come back at Cummings and, make sure that he stands strong, because Cummings is really trying to overstep his boundaries, and so is Schiff. So if we can kind of limit them and let them know that they are not all powerful, I think that will be a very good thing and necessary too. So anyway, that's what I've got going for you right now. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.